Is the Republican Party about to commit political suicide when it comes to illegal immigration? And why are the Democrats so bent on creating this huge new block of voters? I hope to explain it to you today, giving a history lesson from President Johnson. Friend, you're watching The Voice of Resistance.
Standing for truth in the four corners of America. Fighting for justice on the frontiers of the culture wars. And turning resistance into an art form. Randall Terry.
We're going to talk today about the impending immigration disaster, but also do a history lesson as to why the Democratic Party would be so insistent at this time on making immigration reform their number one priority. Stay with me, I promise you you're going to learn a lot. Let's start with some big news. Phyllis Schlafly is about to release a very large study on what the impact of current illegal immigrants becoming legal immigrants will be on the Republic. And Coulter released an article knowing that this was coming called GOP Craft's Plan to Wreck the Country, Lose Voters. That was a fairly inane title. Drudge put her article up and said, quote, Republicans on suicide watch. The numbers that we're about to show make it clear that the Republican Party is putting itself in danger of losing a majority in the House, never regaining control of the Senate, and probably losing the White House in perpetuity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And I want to say for the record, the Republican Party losing its ability to compete is not 1/10 as important as us losing the Republic. And if these numbers are even remotely true, then that is exactly what is at stake. For example, in the report, Schlafly will show that 81% of native-born Americans think that schools should, in fact, teach students to be proud to be an American. Only 50% of naturalized citizens believe that. People who are U.S. citizens, but were born in another country and then have become naturalized citizens, took an oath to uphold the Constitution. They just might not have ever read it. Anyway, concerning the Constitution versus international law, 67% of the people who were born in America believe that our Constitution is a higher legal authority than international treaties, the United Nations, international law, etc. However, only 37% of naturalized citizens think that the Constitution is higher than international law. So that puts our sovereignty at stake. If you're willing to say that we have to do what the international community dictates or what we agreed to in a treaty, and it's going to supersede our Constitution, then we are no longer a free and sovereign independent nation. Concerning Obamacare, right now, less than 40% of the general public likes Obamacare. 42% have an unfavorable view. However, 51% of Asians have a favorable feeling about Obamacare. Koreans, 57%. Only 17% of them are against it. Concerning, and by the way, overall, one of the studies found that 69% of immigrants favor Obamacare. That's almost double the number of Native Americans, people, natural-born citizens, who favor Obamacare. Almost double. All right? Concerning affirmative action. Right now, only 35% of those of us born here support affirmative action. That means that places are required to give you a job not because you tested the best on a score or because you have the best skills, but because of the pigment of your skin or your gender, something of that nature. So 35% of Americans still support affirmative action. It's a dying dinosaur. But 58% of immigrants, including, this is even crazier, 64% of Asians support affirmative action. I've got to take a break. When we come back, we'll look at bigger government, capitalism, and our right to keep and bear arms. We'll see what foreigners believe about that. But this I can tell you. If the Democrats are successful with the Republicans committing suicide for their party, but more importantly, driving a dagger into the Republic, if they are successful in granting amnesty, even if it's on the installment plan, the policy ramifications of what the law will be regarding these various things, those policy ramifications will probably never leave us. And the Republic, as we knew it, will die. My wife and I, for 5 years, have been grinding our own wheat and baking our own bread from scratch. Within 2 hours, you can have fresh wheat in your hand and then piping hot bread come out of the oven. The most nutritious and delicious bread you will ever have. And we do it for under $1 a loaf. Call Paulas Bread and find out about this grain mill and the mixer and how it can save you money and change your life. An appeaser is one who feeds the crocodile, hoping it will eat him last. Sir Winston Churchill. Could granting millions of illegal immigrants be the pathway to total amnesty and then citizenship for them? That's what Ted Cruz is arguing. That's what many other Republicans are arguing. And I think that the facts say that they're probably right. Why do the Democrats want this? Because of their ideology. Let's continue looking at the findings that Phyllis Schlafly is about to make known and then give you how it all adds up. With capitalism, the Pew Research Center found that liberal Democrats, 47% of them, have a dim view or an unfavorable view of capitalism. Okay? That means that they have a leaning towards socialism or Marxism. It's 47%. But 55% of Hispanics have a dim view or an unfavorable view of capitalism. Concerning our right to keep and bear arms, only 27% of Hispanics support the Second Amendment. 55% of non-Hispanic whites support the Second Amendment, our right to keep and bear arms. And concerning bigger government, 75% of Hispanics and 55% of Asian immigrants support bigger government. Think about that. 55% of Asians, 75% of Hispanics, whereas in the general public in America, people who were born here, 48% oppose bigger government and 41% support it. So those numbers, again, with the Hispanics, almost twice as large. And the vast majority of these millions of illegal immigrants are, in fact, Hispanic. Let me point out a few glaring things. Benjamin Franklin said, when the people find that we can vote, that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic. Well, we've seen that in one of the segments coming up. We're going to talk about Johnson and his Great Society programs. We're already seeing the death of the republic. But if you bring in millions of people, pave the way for them to become citizens and voters, they've already told us that they want bigger government. They want affirmative action. They want Obamacare. They want free stuff. The people who risked their lives to come here hundreds of years ago wanted freedom not free stuff. The people who risked their lives crossing the Atlantic or the Alleghenies or the howling Midwest or the Rocky Mountains, they were in search of life, liberty, and property. But what this polling data shows is that there are immigrants who are coming here not because this is the land of the free, but because it is the land where they can get something from the government. And who do you think that they're going to vote for? As much as I have been angry with and disappointed with the Republican Party, the truth is that any meager resistance towards our drift towards socialism, any meager defense of our right to keep and bear arms, is anchored in the Republican Party. That's where people like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Ron Paul have a home, okay? So for better or worse right now, this is a two-party system, and the place where God-fearing, child-loving, freedom-loving, Second Amendment supporting people are finding their home, it's in the Republican Party. The Democrats are pushing like madmen on a mission to get these illegal immigrants on a path to citizenship. Why? Because they will become an insurmountable voting bloc to keep the Democrats in control of both houses of Congress and the White House, and more importantly, to ensure that we remain and grow as a socialist, redistributionist government. That is where we're headed. Now, I was told by a source that there is a secret deal that the Republicans are discussing right now while they're on retreat. The House Republicans are on a retreat discussing strategy. And the secret deal is this. We're going to give Obama what he wants. We're going to have an immigration bill that leads to amnesty, okay? But we're not going to let the vote happen until most of our primaries are over. Because if we do it now, we're going to face backlash and some of us are going to lose our seats. So they're already cutting a deal with the devil to have a vote sometime after the primaries and before the general election. Friend, if this is successful, then as Benjamin Franklin said, it's going to ensure the end of the republic. Let's see how Lyndon Johnson provided the playbook for these people who are pushing for illegal immigrants. All you have to do is buy a voting bloc. Do you want to have knowledge, wisdom, discernment? If so, you have to read good books on theology, history, books that look at the lives of great men and women. So to help you to become a more effective Christian, a better witness for truth, somebody who can engage in productive conversation that exhorts and edifies those that you speak with, we're going to do something crazy. We're offering you these 7 books for a gift of any size. You just pay for the shipping and handling, and then give whatever gift that you can, and we will send them to you. But just to make it a little bit more crazy, I will send you a second copy of my 3 books, autographed. You can give them as a gift to your pastor or to a family member and help extend truth and justice in the world. This is while supplies last. Hi friend, I'm Randall Terry. George Washington said, "Guard against imposters of pretended patriotism." As current Democrats are frantically trying to get illegal immigrants legalized and ultimately to have them become citizens, it's clear that they want it to expand their voting base so that they can control the government. Ultimately, that's what this is about. They have a playbook, they have a history that they can look at regarding purchasing, if you will, a voting bloc. And I'm not trying to be unkind when I say that, but if you're getting something, don't bite the hand that feeds you. If you're getting something from the government and you can vote for the person who's going to take it away from you, or you're going to vote for the person who's going to keep giving it to you, who do you think you have a vested interest in voting for? There is an economic interest in the vote at that point. So, let me do a little history for you. Most of us don't know that in the first half of the 1900s, most black Americans identified themselves with the Republican Party. Booker T. Washington, the century before, Frederick Douglass. These were heralds inside of the black community for the Republican Party. Now, why do you think that is? Well, it's simple. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. And after the Civil War, it was the Republican machinery in government that gave the constitutional amendments that ended slavery. So there was obviously an emotional, a political, a cultural, a familial debt of gratitude. The freedom that was owed to the former slaves, well, they heralded Abraham Lincoln, the first Republican president, as their hero. Well, what happened? So that now it's over 90% of African Americans vote maniacally for the Democratic candidate. Why? Here's the history. Before the 1960 election, where John F. Kennedy was running against Richard Nixon, Martin Luther King was arrested at a sit-in Atlanta, Georgia in October of 60. And John F. Kennedy, the presidential candidate, called Mrs. King, Coretta Scott King, to express his concern for her husband. Meanwhile, Bobby Kennedy was working behind the scenes to try and get King freed. And ultimately, the charges were dropped, and King was moved to another prison and a probation violation, and he was ultimately released even from that. And JFK and Bobby Kennedy are credited, at least in part, or to a large part, with getting King out of jail. Well, word about that spread like wildfire. One story I read said that black Americans were taking their Nixon buttons off and putting on their Kennedy buttons almost overnight as the word spread. Kennedy won that election by 118,000 votes nationally. That's how tight the general vote was. 49.7% to 49.5%. That's how razor thin it is, or it was. And there are people to this day who credit Kennedy's victory with the fact that in the last month prior to the election, because of what the Kennedy brothers did on behalf of Dr. King, that Kennedy became our next president. But that wasn't the end of the matter. What really happened was Lyndon Baines Johnson. President Kennedy made a very strong speech affirming the civil rights of African Americans shortly before he was assassinated. But after he was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson saw the opportunity to literally create a massive voting bloc. And so he did two distinct sets of actions. One involved civil rights, one involved money. I'll tell you what those were and bring it full circle back to the potential of illegal immigrants becoming legal voters who steer this republic for the rest of our lives. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. O Lord, thou God of vengeance, shine forth. Rise up, O judge of the earth.
Render to the proud their deserts. O Lord, how long shall the wicked exult?
If you're a movie buff, you'll know that some banquets have a little problem. They've got great food, delicious, succulent meats, and then there's that one cup with poison. That is the legacy of Lyndon Baines Johnson. Let me explain. He did one thing that was fundamentally just. He fought for, and ultimately signed into law, the Voting Rights Act, which ensured that Black Americans could no longer be discriminated against and made to jump through all kinds of hoops in order to keep them from voting. And by the way, that was a trick that was used primarily by the Democratic Party, okay? That's why Republicans, or rather that's why African Americans used to lean more toward the Republican Party, because the white Democrats of the South, which was their power base, hated the blacks and were determined to keep them out of the political process. And they had done it successfully for almost 100 years. Well, Johnson put an end to that. He also had the Civil Rights Act, which said that you cannot be discriminated against. You can't be prohibited from using a public facility based upon your race. Okay? Those are fundamentally just. But where he bought the loyalty of people was his war on poverty. The war on poverty was aimed directly at African Americans who lived below the poverty line. And among other behemoth government subsidies, Johnson created Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps, and public housing. And then he went a step further in 1965 and he signed an executive order that basically paved the way for affirmative action when it came to federal contractors. That you had to hire a certain number of people based upon their skin color, not simply based upon their talent. So by doing this, President Johnson created, almost overnight, a voting base of millions of people who now could turn to the federal treasury for their daily bread, for their medical needs, for the very roof over their head. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, almost overnight, this massive influx of African American voters became the most fiercely loyal part of the Democratic Party. They were helped on the civil rights side, which was just, but then that poison in the cup. Then they were given access to other people's money. And to this day, they are virtually unflinching as a subculture in American culture. They are virtually unflinching in their support of the Democratic Party and Democratic candidates. In spite of the fact that most African Americans are pro-life, most African Americans are against same-gender marriage, it doesn't throw them off. They say, but I'm still a Democrat. This is the playbook that modern Democrat leaders, from President Obama to Harry Reid to Nancy Pelosi, all of them, this is what they're looking at. They know that if they can pave the way to citizenship for these illegal immigrants, and these illegal immigrants have shown in the polling data that they want free stuff, if they can bring in this new massive voting block of people, it will ensure that Democrats win elections, but more tragically, it will ensure that the public treasury continues to be raided, that our debt continues to increase, and that we put ourselves on a path of economic oblivion, as well as the death of freedom, frankly, the death of the republic. At least that's the way Benjamin Franklin put it. Call your senator, call your House of Representatives and tell them no amnesty, no amnesty, no amnesty for illegal immigrants. The republic is at stake.